afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Divided States of America show. I'm your host, Marlon Gardenera. Today is going to be short and sweet. COVID still got me. Don't think my voice or my nose or my throat can handle a long one. But we're going to cover three things very quickly. COVID, cops, and Roe versus foster care.
And here is your host, Marlon Gardenera.
All right, just giving myself a pause to get any cough or clearing necessary done and out of the way. Today's episode, again, I'm hampered by a confirmed case of COVID. I don't know how I was able to avoid it for 2 years. I'm happy I was able to avoid it for 2 years. Uh, I, I, I got lucky. I've been blessed. But it got me. Um, and I guess my question this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, or early evening, or whenever you watch the show, quite frankly, where are you with COVID right now? I know most of my friends, a good portion of my family has already had it. And they were able to confirm what most of them believed to begin with. It's no big deal. It's just a flu. It's flu-like. Everybody will be fine. We shouldn't have done most of the things that we did, whether it be shutting down businesses, making it hard for people to go to work and pay rent and pay their mortgage, putting people at risk when they did decide to go to work. There's so many factors when you think about COVID. But where are you today? Obviously, I'm in a different place than I was 2 years ago. It was actually harder for me 2 years ago than it was today because I am immunosuppressed. I've had enough health issues that when they talk about those compromised people, I'm one of them. So I always had to take precautions above and beyond what the average person had to take. I think I'm one of the people that they were always trying to protect. But I know a lot of you think that the protection went too far. Protecting me shouldn't have cost you a job or a home. And I agree, don't get me wrong. That balance between public safety and living is real. And there are a number of people that are still caught up right in the middle of it, and they really can't seem to balance out for themselves what that should look like. But I wanted to remind people of a couple of things because it's pretty simple to lose sight of some of the numbers. And I don't want anybody to lose sight of the numbers because they're real. 6,341,637 people have died as a result of COVID. And we've heard all the excuses. We've heard every explanation. They were old. They had other issues. To which I've always said the same thing. So, if I had health conditions, or let me rephrase that, I have health conditions. Does that automatically qualify me as being someone that is, I guess, expendable? Is my life less valuable because I have health issues that make me more vulnerable? How did we write so many older folks off with the excuse they're older? I don't know that that's ever an excuse, and I don't know that your time needs to be up prematurely. And I know a lot of people turn their backs on the reality of COVID because they didn't want to be affected, even though we know 6 million, over 6 million people died as a result of it. There's going to be a lot of people who say, well, it wasn't actually COVID, and there's a conspiracy. The doctors, the nurses, the techs, hospital administrators, everyone in the building was in on the conspiracy that they were claiming people died of COVID to get paid, and it wasn't actually COVID. Listen, I'm not big on conspiracy theories. I would prefer a little proof. I'd prefer some evidence. I'd prefer prosecutions. I'd prefer testimony. I prefer all of the things that we normally use in our justice system or for any due process to determine what the truth is and what isn't. And I understand that people have a lack of faith in government, and that's in many cases well deserved. I don't have a total lack of faith in government, and I'll share that a little bit in the joy story at the end. Remember, as we talk about the most divisive issues in our divided nation, I'll do my best every day to remind us that there is some joy. There are times where our best interests have actually been considered, and we're still here, and we get an opportunity to be together and, like I talked about yesterday, celebrate the 4th. But bring that closer to home. 1,008,832 people at last count, I think this was from yesterday, in America have died from COVID. 1,008,832. Now, for those of you who didn't lose anyone, I respect that that isn't a real number to you. It just isn't. It's something people talk about. It's something people say exists, but you're not sold. You're not convinced. Well, There are, you want to take a wild guess how many people were affected by the 8,832 people who died from COVID? It's very real to each one of them. And each one of them didn't think COVID was a joke. And each one of them didn't think that based on the person's circumstances that, their time was up. And if this was how they were going to go, so be it. It's just not right. It's one of those situations that was very hard for people to deal with. But let's put it in perspective. Let's put in perspective the reality of what COVID has done. And I say this knowing that I have it, knowing that I'm immunocompromised. I say this knowing that I'm fortunate enough to be scheduled for treatment at 2:30 today. At 2:30 today, I'm going to get my first infusion treatment. I guess they take additional precautions for those that are compromised. Hopefully, these types of therapies and treatments are available to more or all. I'm learning as I go. I've been able to avoid it, but here I am now, and I have to have the same fears that other people in my situation have had, where in many cases it's respiratory issues or are just our body's inability to fight off just about anything based on our compromised immune systems. But I'll go through that process and I'll share as I go through it. But let's put it in perspective. 1 million people in America have died. Death is real. Death is awful. Death changes our world. It changes, the lives of the family and friends of the loved ones of the people that are gone. Unexpected accidents, illness, you name it. For whatever reason, the grieving process is real. It's different for everyone, but it's real. And most of us, anybody I would imagine listening to this show has experienced death at some point. But let's put the numbers in perspective, particularly for those people who didn't believe COVID was real enough to care. Excuse me, trying to avoid coughing fits. This was from 2020, the last year that we've had a full summation of all the numbers. Some of the numbers take a little time to come in. Some of the numbers need to be verified, tallied, brought together. Comes from the CDC, and I understand that many of you don't trust the CDC, but I don't trust you. You don't have the ability to gather much information from anywhere, or the time, or the resources, or the money. So I'm going to go with the odds and the people who are responsible for it. And by people who are responsible for it, I don't necessarily mean politicians. I mean, there are people in the Center for Disease Control offices in Atlanta and throughout the United States who go to work just like you and I. They get a paycheck just like you and I. They try to take their 2 weeks of vacation. They try to attend all their kids' sporting events, although they may work long hours. They try to go to the dance recitals. They try to do everything as we do. And again, I don't believe in conspiracies to the point where every politician and every single person who works in the government has this little leaflet where they figure out, how are we going to manipulate the people today? Sorry, folks, I'm just not one of those people, nor am I gullible enough to not question things that don't make sense. But let's assume these numbers, for the lack of your resources for better ones currently, and if you have better ones, reach out to the show. Let me know. For lack of resources currently, here are some deaths, some numbers in perspective. There were 40,000 motor vehicle deaths in 2020. 40,000 motor vehicle deaths in 2020. Now, we know how many trips we take. We know how often we're in the car. We know what the freeways look like. We know what traffic jams look like. We understand the importance of vehicles on an everyday basis and the impact they have on our lives and commerce and transporting goods and services and the list of reasons why that happens. I would imagine there are a fair number of trips on a daily basis. 40,000 people died. In perspective to COVID, it's not a comparison of how you died. It's the reality that COVID killed in 2 years 1 million people. Deaths, if we double that, about 80,000 for motor vehicles. I don't mean to make light of or minimize the impact of a death by vehicle, but it happens. It just didn't happen to the same degree COVID did in America. Firearm deaths. Obviously, we'll spend a number of days and hours and shows talking about guns and their impact in America. It's unfortunate the role they play. It's unfortunate the culture that we have. Don't get me wrong, I'm fully prepared to protect my family if someone were to enter my home. I'm not for banning guns. I do think there should be some more restrictions. I don't think all guns are necessary. It's no different than we don't have the ability to go to the local gun store and buy grenades, so I question some of the weapons that we can buy. But I'll just say this. Firearm deaths in 2020, firearm deaths in 2020 accounted for 45,000 deaths. Firearm deaths in 2020 accounted for 45,000 deaths. Put that number in perspective again to COVID. Drug overdoses, a sad reality often associated with poverty and destitution or the lack of hope horrible situations that just get worse and worse, and people self-medicate. People take themselves to alternate places. People's lives are devastated. Their families are devastated. The total number of deaths that came from drug overdoses in 2020 was just shy of 92,000. Again, in relation to COVID, if we cut the million number from 2 years in half, there's 500,000 people that are gone as a result of COVID. And then there's also the sad reality of suicides. And as much as we are doing, and when you consider the things we should be doing to help prevent suicides, there were 45,000. So I only bring these things out to say this. It doesn't matter where you are on COVID. That is your right. That is your choice. Public safety is a real thing. We spend a lot of money on police and fire, the CDC, National Institutes of Health, and a list of organizations, a list of nonprofits. There's so many ways we spend money to protect people, to keep them out of harm's way, to help them heal if they get in harm's way. But the reality of COVID has been significant in our country, really significant. And for the people who made light of it, hopefully that number means something to you. Worse, I hope you didn't lose anybody to make it even more real. But what are you doing right now? What are you doing today? What precautions did you take? I can't say that I've been super cautious. You know, from yesterday's episode, I was in Las Vegas last week. I was at Dodger Stadium last week. I was not wearing a mask. I am immunocompromised. These are just common sense things that people can do to take precautions. I didn't. Now, the risk that I took, here's the result. I have COVID. I need treatment. Let's hope there is no, there's no turn for the worst. And I'm sure everybody who got COVID before they went were in this exact same situation thinking, I'll be fine. I do think I'll be fine. I do think we've come a long way in terms of treatments. I do think, well, we all know the number of deaths has decreased. But again, I'm curious, where are you on that? And then I'm going to ask this question, and I think I'm going to ask this question over and over and over again as we take a look at this show. This one's real to me. Where's the we, the people, in COVID? How many of you had a me, the people, approach to COVID? Excuse me. How many of you people thought about what was in your best interest first and foremost, and anything beyond that really wasn't one of your primary concerns? Be honest with yourself. How many of you were in that situation? How many of you refused vaccinations? And don't get me wrong, I understand at one point we thought vaccinations were supposed to keep us from getting COVID. Then the variants start coming out and things evolve, and that's not what they do anymore. Now, if I understand correctly, and I'm hoping, because I certainly had 3 vaccinations and an additional treatment because I'm immunosuppressed, the hope is that they keep you from severe illness and death. Listen, for me, either one of those were reasonable trade-offs. And I know we all like to use our own anecdotal evidence about, well, I know someone who this or that. I don't know anyone who's had an adverse reaction to vaccinations. I know there have been adverse reactions. I know there are people who have suffered. I don't know that there are people who have died. There may very well be. I'm not denying that or arguing that. But I do know that I think the number of people who would be dead as a result of COVID would be entirely different if we didn't have vaccinations. If some people didn't take the we the people approach to make sure that we the people wouldn't be dying at a greater rate than we already did. Where's your we the people approach to this? Ask yourself, was it we the people or was it me the people? That's it for me and COVID for today. I'm going to take 10 seconds. I'm going to remember the reality of the number of people who no longer are with us as a result of COVID. As of yesterday, 8,832. Just our reality. Now, that translates to other things. And this one is a little surprising to me because you thought we were a little bit further along this path than maybe we are. I'm going to share with you a news story or a news report from a local media outlet who's covering the fact that in San Diego County, there are a number of city employees who are on the verge of being fired, not because they won't take the vaccination, they're refusing to even test. I'm going to play you a quick news story from a CBS affiliate here in San Diego. Now listen, I know we all have different perspectives on this and a number of other issues. I'm aware. What I'm not aware of is how to make sure my computer's functioning properly. I'm aware that we all have different perspectives on this, but that last tidbit is probably what gets me. There are 45 police officers who are on the verge of being fired. Now let's put the importance of their role and the sacrifice and the challenges they're willing to face and the things they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Let's not lose sight of the sacrifices they're willing to make on behalf of you and me. Let's not forget the number of times they've been helpful to me, there hasn't been a list of times I've had incidents. I've had a challenge with a police officer, not police officers, not the profession. I'll share that story some other time. They're noble men and women who serve. They really are. But there's 45 of them who, it appears, haven't even bothered to take one COVID test. And this is after there was a considerable number of arguments over whether or not they needed to be vaccinated. My attitude about vaccination has always been this: you have the right to control your body. It's up to you. You can do or say what you want with it. You do not have to get a vaccination. I stand behind you 100%. If someone is forcing you to get one, I will stand next to you and fight them to the end. However, you do not get the opportunity to take your employers or coworkers or the customers you serve. You do not have the right to take their public health or put their public health at risk without any mitigating steps, only in that you cannot be forced as a police officer to get a vaccination. But you can, as a result of your employer who says vaccinations are required, not keep that job. You're not, what's the word, entitled to any job. You're not entitled to work for an employer such that you don't have to follow their rules. So, again, I back the police officers. You do not need to be vaccinated at all. Now, if that's a requirement of your employer, if you want to be employed by that employer, I don't know that you get to decide what the rules are for your employer. I had a couple stints in the corporate world. I didn't get to tell them what the policies were going to be. Or I suppose I could, and I could carry on as if my policies, the ones I decided, were going to be the ones I followed long term, no problem. But I'm guessing they probably would fire me if those weren't in line with what they wanted. So, again, I support the officers who decided they don't want to be vaccinated. I get it. That then becomes an issue for your employer, and your employer getting to decide, do we want employees who are not following our policies? Because you are not entitled to that job. You are not. You may be qualified, you may be prepared, you may be educated, you may be the one. You may be really good at it, and I hope you keep it. I hope we figure out ways to make things work. Well, I know in the city of San Diego, they made one concession. And maybe there were other challenges, and I'm not encompassing the whole picture, but I'll just give you the part that I know. The concession was you don't have to get vaccinated, but you do need to get tested weekly. And apparently there are 45 officers who have decided, I'm not getting tested at all. And quite frankly, I don't know that that's fair. We heard the other side of the leverage. There are short on police officers in San Diego. Losing one more officer can, and I believe this, affect public health. So let me ask, which portion of public health, which angle on public health is supposed to matter more? The health of our city and the response times of our police and their ability to step in horrible situations and save lives and protect people, or a cop walking around with COVID spreading it to people? I don't know that I understand that there's a lesser of two evils. When I think about the divided states of America and division, sometimes there are solutions. Sometimes there are ways to moderate the ridiculousness of both sides, or the ridiculousness of one group wanting this and one group wanting that, and them expecting you to follow and it being all or nothing. But there are times when we can probably accommodate both. The instance here is a COVID test. I had one this morning. I took a home test yesterday. Yes, it tickled my nose. I didn't enjoy it. What I understood from the report, what I understand from a little reading, is that there is a chemical that may be used. There's a chemical that's used to sterilize the cotton swabs for the COVID tests. That chemical does not remain on the cotton swab when it's being used on someone to swab their nose for a COVID test. I believe it's a religious exemption that they've asked for based on the use of that particular chemical. But the chemical's not on the cotton swab when it gets used. So those 45 officers have decided that their role as a public servant, providing for public safety, does not include them protecting people from them. I didn't like the leverage part from what you heard from other police officers. I can't question what they do, but I'm one of those people that thinks that just because you do something great doesn't mean you get an exemption from doing harm. I know they have a tough job. I know they have tough choices, but they also have an employer. And if they don't want to work for that particular employer because they do not want to follow that particular employer's rules, then that may not be the employer for you. As it relates to religion, if there's a real religious exemption, again, you all know that I believe I am a Christian. I'm not going to fight people on their religious beliefs, but it better be real, because if you're just using religion as a ploy to get you out of following the rules of your particular employer, are you trustworthy enough to do the job that we've been sending you out there to do on a regular basis anyway? Now, if you really believe it, I don't know that it's a matter of trust, but scientifically, I think that they have broken down the reality that that particular chemical is not on the cotton swab. So your objection to that chemical in the manufacturing process, I guess, does religion extend to the manufacturing process if it doesn't actually impact you, doesn't actually touch you, doesn't reach you? I guess that's to be debated. What the city did say, though, is that will be due process, because I don't care who you are or what you believe, you have an opportunity to be heard and for those issues to come all the way full circle so that you get whatever's going on for you heard and you get an opportunity to state your case, and that the laws of the country apply. But I'm going to ask this to the 45 officers, even though I know, even though I respect you and what you do. Again, that respect doesn't exempt you from doing harm, in my estimation. It does not at all. You are being held to a higher standard, quite frankly, because of the role, the power, the authority you've been given. You're held to a higher expectation. And if you can't meet that expectation, that's a decision for you as to whether or not you want to continue to be held to that same standard. But I don't know that because you do something very important that we should exempt you in total from your responsibility to people. So I'll just say, again, for those 45 officers, is it a we the people thing or is it a me the people thing? If it's a we the people and you're protecting people with religious faith, hey, I guess I have to stand behind you. But if the science says otherwise, and this was a ploy or a method to get something done, I don't stand with you. I have higher expectations. You don't get exemptions from those. If that's not a standard you want to live to, you'd have to resign from your position. If your employer is asking you to do it and you think it's persecuting your religion, get your day in court. You better get due process. If you don't, again, I'd be happy to stand next to you and fight for you. I want your rights to be upheld, but I want you as a public servant providing public safety to be safe to the public too. I think you should see that as one of your obligations in the particular role that you play. I wouldn't equate it to drinking, but if I understand correctly, officers aren't allowed to be drunk carrying a sidearm. There's a reason for that. It's a basic standard. And while I know my religion allows for wine, I can't drink as much as I want and go do my job anywhere I want to and claim a religious exemption. If I'm missing something, if something doesn't make sense, reach out to me, host@thedsashow.com, host@thedsashow.com. I am your host. I think you know my name. It's Marlon Gardner. Hopefully you're finding this at least useful. I'm going to take another 10-second break to clear my throat, and then we'll be right back with the last of the three topics. For better or worse, I consume myself with a lot of news. It's just general interest. It's my enjoyment of reading on a day-to-day basis. I'm just curious. I read books. I read lots and lots and lots of news. There's certainly times when I can't stand the news. I refuse to watch or listen to. I really have a hard time with local news. If you listen to the first 10 minutes, you might think the world is coming to an end. And I know the world's not coming to an end, so I can't watch it. We tried again last night. I know some local newscasters. This wasn't one of my particular friends, but we watched, and it was awful. I mean, not the reporting. The stories being covered were awful. It was hard to endure. Had there been a warning to me about how to avoid being in one of those situations, had there been a warning of what to look for to help prevent those situations, I think I might have had a different perspective, but it literally was just reporting what was new. It was reporting the news. And it's unfortunate that local news has to lead with that. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. Well, I'm moving on to a topic that I feel like it's never going to end, but there are so many loose ends, and the impact of it is going to be around for so long that I can't ignore the reality. I think I was already clear with you about my stance on abortion. I am personally pro-life, but I don't have the expectation that you are. It's none of my business what you are. If you want me to share the good news with you, come and talk to me. I'll be happy to tell you how I think uh, my beliefs have impacted my life and the lives of people around me. I'd be happy to. But if you're not asking me, I don't know that I'm going to put it on you. You are free from that. You are free from me. You are free from anybody who wants to do that to you. And I respect that. And I respect other faiths and other beliefs up until they try to put any one of those things on us. And I'll just use this, not knowing much about it, but I know how a lot of some of the people in America like to talk about Sharia law. I don't know Sharia law. I don't. What I do know is I would imagine a good number of people don't want to live under it. They don't want to have to follow the rules of the versions of Sharia law that we tend to hear in our news media. So the point of that is I don't want people to have to be forced to live under what I believe. I'd like people to stay out of the way so that I can believe what I believe and I can live by that. I understand that maybe my employer won't go with it. And again, if I'm working for someone else, I have to be willing to understand what their policies are. But as it relates to abortion in America, I'm about believing what I believe, and I'm assuming you're going to do the same. But there are some side effects that I don't know that we all take into consideration, and I don't think that this should have a bearing on whether you're for it or against it. I think I'm essentially past that. We'll have more discussions. We'll bring some people on. Well, that the discussion will always be had. But I heard an interesting story yesterday, and then I read something very interesting. And as you can see from the words down below, Roe versus foster care. As we start to deal with the consequences of the most recent decision, and I understand that there are consequences from abortion. I understand those consequences for many people are more real than any story we could talk about when you have to consider when people can't get abortions. I get it. Folks, I'm not arguing that. That's not why I'm here. That won't, I don't think that serves anybody for me to argue that. But I will say this. I'm going to show you a picture of a young lady, very young lady. She's a little girl. Here's the reality behind this picture. Her name is Alexandra Rubio. This picture was from a few years back. She's much older now. But the poster she's holding was very clear and it was very real. She had been in foster care for 1,015 days. I don't know her full story, not the point. I don't mean to use her other than to illustrate the fact that before the end of Roe v. Wade, the federal protection via Roe v. Wade for abortion throughout America, we had on any given day 424,000 kids in our foster care system. 424,000 kids in foster care. And here's another reality for them. There's already shortages in places for them to go in total as foster kids, not even as adoptees. There's already a shortage of places for them to go. They, in large part, have low high school graduation rates. They're already behind the eight ball. They have to compete against people who've got great educations and great opportunities. They're already behind the eight ball. They've already been in situations that they don't understand. Children aren't supposed to understand some of the things that are happening to them. It's just a reality. They don't have to understand it, but they still experience it. I'm sorry, I got to take a Marco Rubio moment. I'm only doing it because I have COVID. Nothing against Marco Rubio. Just my reality today. I'm sorry. Nonetheless, 424,000 kids, low high school graduation rates, disproportionately high rates of incarceration and homelessness once they get through the foster care system. Our system has some holes in it. There are some hard-working people doing everything they can in child services to help avoid that. There are some loving, wonderful. I know a family that's just amazing. That they have beautiful children of their own. They've adopted some children, and they take in foster kids at a moment's notice. It's one of the, again, we talked about volunteerism. We talk about Americans stepping up. There are people who step up all the time. It's amazing what people will do in America. But a lot of times children end up in foster care because their parents can't afford to keep them or they can't afford to take care of them safely. Some of the women don't want to give up their children for adoption, but determine later that they're not fit to be a parent. Many of them come from destroyed families, not in a position to ask a family member to step in and help. What will the decision on Roe v. Wade in the 24 states that are most likely going to outlaw it completely going to be on foster kids? It's a real question. This is not about are you for or against. What are people going to do? Who's going to step up? How are we going to help solve the problem for the kids who are brought into this world unplanned, and I don't want to say unwanted? We will step up. There will be people who want them, but are we really prepared for that reality? I certainly hope some of the people who impose or put their beliefs on others are prepared to help the kids, because quite frankly, adults get to mess up their lives any way they want to. That's your right. You choose. Do what you want. It's unfortunate when that impacts kids. And what are we going to do for them? Will people step up? Will this change? Average placement time for children in most states is longer than a year and a half. 5% of the kids in foster care are there for 5+ years. And of course, because the sad reality in America, if something is going to do damage to people, the people who are going to be most likely damaged, 1 in 3 of the kids in foster care are of color. They're minorities. It's just the reality in America. I want to do this show to have the discussions about what we do to fix it, not to point out how bad people who don't agree with me are, because it would just be my opinion. And for the most part, they're probably not that bad. They have strong opinions in particular areas, but we don't get to meet them. We don't get to talk to them. We don't talk long enough to understand the full breadth of anyone with an opposing opinion to have such a strong opinion about them. Don't get me wrong. There's some public figures out there who spend a lot of time in front of a camera. And if you're going to spend that much time in front of a camera, we are going to get an opportunity to know you a little bit better. If you're a person of interest in the media is going to do a little digging. They're going to find out. We're going to learn some things about you, good and bad, and we're going to be in a better position to form an opinion. But for the average person sharing their opinion, or for the average even radio host, it doesn't matter who you are, podcast, doesn't matter where you are. We don't get enough opportunity to talk. So again, that's going to be the point of this show. I never know how long my voice is going to hold out. So again, I refrain from the longer version of what we intend and hope to do. But I did want to cover those 3 things. COVID is real. It's still here. Where were you on it? Was it we the people, or was it me the people? There are 45 cops in San Diego who refused to even get COVID tests. The question of public safety, both 1, that they provide, and number 2, that they're not supposed to jeopardize, because officers should be held to a higher standard based on the authority they are given. And I understand if they don't want to be held to that standard, but that's the expectation. If you're going to be given that much authority, you have to do the right thing with it. And what's the right thing? If you're a public servant concerned about public safety, you not being the one that does harm is probably the right thing. And them finding a mitigating step between a vaccine in the form of weekly testing, I think we're almost there. I hope it works out. I hope those people get due process. I hope we get to a logical conclusion. But is that a we the people situation or a me the people situation? Because I'm far more interested in we than me. In a shared society, if we don't do it, we're going to have some serious problems. And then the last one, it's already a we the people problem. The me the people approach to foster care is I don't care. Doesn't matter. Not important. Not my problem. I already had my kids. They're already grown. I have my kids now. I don't need to worry about what's happening with other kids. And in America, that is a we the people thing. Yes, we should be. Yes, we should be. If we're not, don't question when things don't work out well. Don't question when people are destitute. Don't question when people are on drugs. Don't question when kids have kids. Don't question when kids have kids and the parent wasn't educated, so they didn't value education enough to be in position to give the other child a good education. Don't question what's wrong with America if you're not a part of what's right. If you're not a part of we, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, the pursuit of life, liberty, happiness. If we're not a part of that, what's the point? Another short one. I appreciate those of you who've been able to tune in, whether you did it live or you did it on a podcast. Know that we are going to be here weekdays at noon, 3 p.m. Pacific, provided my health holds up. I'll be here every day this week. We're available on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and Twitter. You'll also be available on podcasts wherever you listen to your favorite shows. When we break up topics or we have big topics, we'll break them up so you can only hear things that are interesting to you, but hopefully you give each and every one of those a try. Coming soon, we want to know what you think. I'll make sure you know how to do that, and we'll get you on air talking talking about the things that matter to you in this divided states of America. Be sure and subscribe. Join our group on Facebook. Find us on Twitter. We'd love to engage. I appreciate y'all listening. You've caught another episode of the Divided States of America show.